Well, greetings, Imagination Connoisseurs. Once again, welcome to this Robservations, the show about something. I am your host, Robert Meyer Burnett, or as many people call me, the Viceroy of Verisimilitude, the Master of Fun and Wonder, or the existential Mr. Rogers, whatever you prefer. This is the show, of course, about something, and Robservations, as it is every day, is brought to you by Lucky Tiger Men's grooming products for those men who want to look good and feel great. And if you are so inclined, you can go to their website at getluckytiger.com. And if you punch in PGS for Post-Geek Singularity, this community, our community, your community, you get 20% off of your orders. And let me tell you something, ladies and gentlemen, I'm having a Lucky Tiger giveaway. It's true. We're doing a Lucky Tiger giveaway. You know, I'm always going on about their facial scrub or their all-over body wash, which I quite enjoy. We're giving away a container of their body wash to anybody who visits the website and comments on a letter. Any letter that's on the website at theburnettwork.net. If you read a letter, you comment on it, you are entered into a random drawing where you might win. Check it out. A bottle of Lucky Tiger all over body wash. And you know what? You don't just have to be a dude. It can be anybody. Now, this is, of course, unfortunately, it's only good for North America. But hey, we're going to be doing one every week. We're going to be giving away a tube or a bottle of Lucky Tiger all over body wash until the 300th episode of Robservations, which is dropping on December 7th. That's right. It's going to be a 5-hour plus extravaganza. My 300th episode. I'll be moving into the Imaginarium. It'll be a whole different set. There'll be an opening logos and graphics. We're gonna step it up. I'm stepping up the game. You know, I mean, I keep watching YouTubers that I watch a lot, and I watch a lot of YouTube. You know, I watch a lot of the Midnight's Edge folks. I watch Gary Beekler over at Nerdrotic, who I got to say, Gary has started to do this new thing that I really like, where he puts like a clip, some kind of a clip that he accentuates whatever it is he's going to talk about, and then his logo hits nerdrotic.com. I love it. I love what he did. It's kind of like a teaser, you know, and it's great. And of course, Dictor von Doomcock, all these guys, man, guys, girls, I'm having a good time. And I got to step up my game because everybody else is. So why not? And there's a lot of channels out there, a lot of people that I like to write. You know, I got to say, there's a couple of new YouTube channels. First of all, the Dave Cullen Show. Dave Cullen, he's a guy, if you don't know who his name is right off the bat, the Dave Cullen Show, he uses an animated avatar of himself when he's talking. Dave Cullen did an appreciation review of 2010, the year we make contact. I want to say kudos to you, Dave. Kudos to you for coming out and doing an appreciation. You know, 2010 is a movie that it's nowhere near 2001. And of course, it's a little dated with certain elements that Peter Hyams changed from the book. But it was really cool to see Dave Cullen come out and do a really nice piece on 2010. So check that out. Also, Critical Drinker, my man, the Critical Drinker, who I love, did a piece on Event Horizon. I love it when YouTubers I like to watch come out and they do videos that are unexpected that I like. But there's a new channel, and I'm drawing a blank on it. But I want to say it's a vintage toy channel, and I don't know who it's hosted by. He's an Australian guy, I think, but he does a really good job covering vintage toys. He's got a really nice display of his own toys. He's got a great collection, great taste, but I've really been enjoying watching his vintage toy videos. I went down a rabbit hole. I think I watched 2.5 hours of his content this weekend, so kudos to him. And why can't I remember his name? I feel terrible. I want to say it's Vintage Toy something. You should check it out. Anyway, and of course, my ever-loving Genic. If you like Genic, if you want to see models painted, Gundam models, Genic is your man. Look up Genic's channel. I watch it. It's hypnotic. He just paints Gundam models, and he painted a Lamborghini Aventador model. And the guy guy's a Rembrandt. I'll tell you. I don't know what this has to do with anything. I'm going off on a jag here. I'm going to get back on track, and let's talk about what happened on this Veterans Day. First of all, anyone who is a former service member, a current service member, anybody who's served in any of the militaries in the United States, first of all, thank you for doing so. I hope everything is going well with you. My father was a World War II veteran, believe it or not. He was a communications officer stationed in Alaska, but his claim to fame is he once flew on a plane with Douglas MacArthur. My father, Richard Dick Burnett, he's no longer with us, but he was a World War II vet, and one of his best friends was Captain John Harder, who I've once mentioned on this show. He was one of my dad's best friends, and Captain John was obviously a pilot, and he flew almost every airplane that ever existed. And once, kid you not, I found a story in a UFO book that was in the Mercer Island Public Library that mentioned him as once seeing a UFO. And I went to him once. I probably was 8. I said, Captain John, I read that you saw a UFO. And he laughed, and he told me the story, and he said he saw something he couldn't explain. But hey, I thought that was pretty cool. So happy Veterans Day can you say happy Veterans Day? A good Veterans Day to everyone, to all of our service members, past, present, and future. Thanks for your service. Stay safe and keep making sure that the world is safe for American democracy. Thank you very much. By the way, you know what? I want to throw out something else randomly. Jason Inman and his wife, Ashley V. Robinson. If you know Jason Inman at all, great guy, really, really nice guy. You can find him on the inner tubes, interwebs. He's out there. He runs a really cool thing where he gathers comic books. People donate comic books. You can donate comic books from your own collection, and he distributes them to our troops all over the world. And he himself is I believe he's former Army, and I think it's a really cool thing that he does. So find Jason Inman. He's also a comic book writer in his own right. He did Jupiter Jet with Ashley. So check them out, find them, and if you want to get involved in their comics for troops, I don't know exactly what it's called. I should have done research. This is all extemporaneous off the top of my head, but check it out because it's a really cool thing that he does. I know that he was started this weekend. He was gathering comics. It's a really neat thing that he does. Anyway, so for all of you who are following the box office, if you follow Hollywood, you know that the number one top grossing movie this weekend was Midway, Roland Emmerich's Midway. It didn't make a whole lot of money, less than $20 million, but still, it had a lot of co-financing. I think it's going to be just fine. But the big news of the day in terms of the weekend box office was Dr. Sleep. Dr. Sleep, in my mind, was a unique movie for two reasons. Of course, Dr. Sleep was Stephen King's novel that he wrote that is a follow-up to his own book, The Shining. Now, it doesn't say that it's a sequel to The Shining. I mean, I'm sure it did on the dust cover, but it's not like it didn't say Dr. Sleep, The Shining 2. It wasn't like that, but it picks up with Dan Torrance. The character that was a little boy, was Jack Nicholson and Shelley Duvall's son in the movie. And of course, the son of Jack Torrance in the novel, The Shining. It was supposed to do $30 million worth of business this weekend, and it did do that. And it's surprised everybody, especially because Warner Brothers is just coming off with another smash hit with It Chapter 2, another Stephen King adaptation. Stephen King has been killing it in The Tall Grass, which is based on a novella that he wrote with his son, Joe Hill. That just dropped on Netflix. Of course, Mike Flanagan, who directed Dr. Sleep, also directed Gerald's Game and, of course, The Haunting of Hill House. So he's been killing it. But the movie did not connect with audiences, which is kind of a strange thing. And I am sort of equating it on the John Campea show this morning. People were wondering, somebody asked, why do you think that is? So we talked a lot about that on the show today, and it made me I've been thinking about it ever since. Why would a movie like Dr. Sleep, which arguably it had great trailers, I've heard mixed things, but word of mouth has mostly been good. There was a lot of good reviews. And I'm perplexed by just how anemic its box office was. I mean, they were expecting twice as much, and it reminded me of what I thought about Blade Runner 2049, because initially, first of all, I have not Blade Runner 2049. I think is a wonderful, wonderful movie. Although I did have a conversation with writer producer Brian Fuller about Blade Runner 2049, where he gave me a different perspective, and it sort of changed my mind. But I want to read, there's a couple of articles that I would like to read about this from industry trade publications. This one comes today from Deadline. Anthony D'Alessandro wrote this article. Dr. Sleep set to lose $20 million for Warner Brothers in a trio of fall duds, but Joker and It Chapter 2 to deliver $600 million in profit. So this is from Deadline today. Finance sources tell us today that Warner Brothers' weekend Stephen King upset Dr. Sleep is poised to lose around $20 million after all ancillaries should earn $100 million at the global box office. If ticket sales are lower in the $80 million range, then the loss swells to around $30 million. This comes after the grand underperformance of the mid-$50 million Warner Brothers horror production, a studio which often hits home runs in the horror field off of its New Line label. Not to mention it's the third dud from the Burbank lot in a row this fall after Wide releases The Goldfinch, a reported $50 million loss, and Motherless Brooklyn. Studio's exposure is less than 25% on the $26 million production, which is only rang up $7.5 million worldwide to date. By comparison, the reboot of King's Pet Sematary from Paramount made over $112 million worldwide back in the spring off a $21 million production cost. I hear Warner suits are baffled and saddened by how a well-received 74% fresh and good audience polled movie like Dr. Sleep with a B+ cinema score and 4 stars, 82% fresh on PostTrack just crap the bed. This one will have them Monday morning quarterbacking tomorrow. By the way, this article was written on the 10th. I guess that is today. What a horror show the November box office is turning out to be. Last weekend, Paramount and Skydance's Fox and their Terminator Dark Fate tanked, indicating an ultimate $130 million loss. This weekend, it's Dr. Sleep. Some even have their doubts about the overall global on Midway, though Lionsgate should be fine stateside. Plus, look out next weekend, but Sony's Charlie's Angels is already having its box office obituary written with a mid-teen domestic start, unless they can get young females out at the last minute and push the pick to a $20 million plus opening. Good luck. You know what, though? You know who's out there pimping that movie hard? K-Stu. Give it up for K-Stu. She was on SNL. She was actually really good, I thought. And she's been everywhere, opening herself up, being honest. I got to tell you, she comes off really cool to me. And this is a total aside, but there's a really interesting movie that I quite enjoyed called Personal Shopper that she was in. I know that's what it's called, Personal Shopper. Oliver Assisias, however you pronounce his last name. But Personal Shopper is basically a ghost story that I quite enjoyed. I thought she was very good in it. And she does play a personal shopper to a celebrity in Europe. It's a very interesting movie. Criterion put it out on Blu-ray. Kudos to Criterion. If you really want to have an interesting horror double feature, get Personal Shopper on Blu or get Criterion's awesome The Lure. Because if you ever wanted to see a debut feature from a Polish female director that is a horror comedy musical about mermaids, I'm not kidding, The Lure is your movie. I adore this film. The Lure is terrific. The Lure and Personal Shopper. Very different movies, different experiences, but a good double bill nonetheless. Oh, Anna and Elsa, save us from this autumn box office damnation. By the way, had Warner's kept Wonder Woman 1984 on the calendar and MGM kept Bond 25, we wouldn't be in this toilet. Estimates figure that Dr. Sleep will clear $149 million in revenues from global theatrical rentals, global free and pay TV, plus global home entertainment, including streaming, next to combined production, global P&A participations, residuals, and global home entertainment costs of $171 million. And no, Joker did not cost 100 million in global P&A, prints and advertising. We already laid out to you why Dr. Sleep was in a deep coma, a late-breaking, uneventful campaign. No tee-off to the horror fans at San Diego Comic-Con. It's 2.5-hour running time, which doesn't work for horror fans or exhibitors, the latter who are cuffed at programming the pick. One auditorium can get as little as 4 showtimes in a given day for Dr. Sleep. Let me just tell you, everything that they just said, other than San Diego, is wrong, because Chapter 2 was different than that. Also, this 2013 novel by King doesn't have the brand equity that It did. Very true. Not to mention, Dr. Sleep didn't wake up the young female and Hispanic horror-going demos with its billing as a sequel to the 1980 movie The Shining. When it came to those who cited the franchise as their reason to attend, females under 25 were last in that category, 18% behind all other demos. Ditto for the 13 to 17-year-olds. 17%, yes, it's an R-rated movie, but they'll still go. Not to mention Hispanics, another prime horror movie-going demo, trailed Caucasians, 18% to 32% for that same reasoning. Many are also citing that Ewan McGregor's cold turn as young psychic Danny also softened grosses, with post-track showing that he was not the top reason why people went to see the movie. Top influences being genre, subject matter, and the King canon. McGregor was a distant reason at 16%. All of this said, Film Industry Social Media Analytics Corp Relish Mix cited a huge reason why Dr. Sleep didn't work. For those who have seen the movie and who share frustrations with Kubrick's The Shining, Sleep similarly departs from the novel in ways they would not have preferred. Boom, mic drop. Here's the silver lining in all of this. For Warner Brothers, similar to Disney, when they stumble, Warner's can afford this latest string of fall losses, for Joker and It are poised to deliver well north of $600 million in profits after all ancillaries. Okay, I know it's a lot of industry speak. What does it all mean? I got another article I want to read too. Look, it's easy to Monday morning quarterback all of these things. But I think one of the things about Dr. Sleep is the same problem that Blade Runner 2049 had. All of you Imagination Connoisseurs, all of you members of this, the Post-Geek Singularity community, you probably all have seen The Shining, because my channel, admittedly, while great, and I do have what I'd like to consider to be, in the genre space, the greatest audience on all of YouTube. And let's face it, you are. So you've all seen The Shining. But for the Gen Pop out there, The Shining is a horror movie that came out in 1980. It's not exactly, and there was a mini-series afterwards that Mick Garris directed. So the idea that The Shining is this genre classic, well, that's good. And it was directed by my all-time favorite director, Stanley Kubrick. Or Kubrick, or however you want to pronounce it. I've always said Stanley Kubrick, but other people have said it differently. I just know that, like, it's Martin Scorsese, but I've heard it's the real pronunciation is Martin Scorsese, but Scorsese is what most people say. I say Kubrick, but it could be Kubrick. I've got to be corrected. I'm not sure. But the fact is, The Shining came out 39 years ago. And your young, newly minted horror crowd, whether you're Hispanic or a female or whatever, if you're 25 years old and you're going to the picture shows and you're going to see the latest horror film, and you became a horror fan when you were around even 10, that means you were how old when you started watching horror movies? And The Shining was almost a quarter century old by the time you began your journey into the horror canon. So the idea, first of all, what's really interesting about Dr. Sleep was the novel was a sequel to King's novel. Famously, Stanley Kubrick departed from that novel and turned it into a Kubrick film. And Stephen King was not very happy. He's been very vocal about his dissatisfaction with Kubrick's film. Now, of my favorite Kubrick movies, The Shining, well, Stanley Kubrick did make a lot of movies, but The Shining is not even in my top 5 of Kubrick films. I like it, but to me, The Shining, even though it's A-list, it's his only B movie, really. It's his total stab at B movie genre stuff. And I once read a story, and it could be apocryphal, that Kubrick he really spent most of his time adapting novels or stories of some kind. And I had heard that he was looking for something to adapt, and he was in his office for days and days, hours and hours trying to find a new book. And his secretary or his assistant at the time would he would go in and read, so there'd be some quiet time, and then she would hear a book crash against the wall. Kubrick would not get very far into it, and then he would throw the book against the wall and discuss. The book would fall down, and it was fairly rhythmic how this went on. And then suddenly the book stopped hitting the wall, and Kubrick kept reading and kept reading. And that book was, in fact, The Shining. And that's when he decided to make it. Well, like Blade Runner 2049, within our imagination connoisseur circles, and certainly within Hollywood, Blade Runner is a revered film. It's revered amongst filmmakers. It's revered amongst genre fans. It's revered around Hollywood. But a lot of the time, these kinds of things, this reverence does not translate into the real world. If you're a casual film goer, which most people are, you can't expect a casual film goer to be really excited about a sequel to a movie that Warner Brothers put out in 1980. And I think ultimately, when it comes down to it, you can look at your demographics, but the fact of the matter is, today's audiences, we've talked about it on this show. I've given pop culture a 20-year lifespan. Sure, there are things that transcend that 20-year lifespan, but for most people, it's a 20-year period of time, because in your formative years, when you like pop culture, whether you're a kid, let's say from 8 to 16, during that time, maybe even a little younger, when you're playing with toys or video games, whatever floated your boat when you were like 8 to 16 years old, you've got 20 years from that time. So the time when you're 36, maybe even push it to 40, where nostalgia will grab you by the throat and throttle you until you get a little bit of that taste of whatever it was you loved when you were a kid that is now writ large on the big screen. Both Blade Runner 2049 and The Shining fell outside of that 20-year. Now, I could be wrong. But for the most part, pop culture is not something that most people are paying much attention to. We are. I'm an aging man-child. I'm an arrested adolescent. I'm still the viceroy of verisimilitude. I still care about model kits and spaceships and action figures, which has, in a way, doomed me to lead a certain kind of life. And most people are not like that. Most people look forward to getting married and having kids and settling down and having a nice, stable life. Well, I prefer to be an independent filmmaker, still wondering where my next paycheck is coming from, whether or not my next project is going to be, I don't know, picked up for distribution, and if more than 6 people will ever see it. Who knows? But I'm content to live the life that I live. But most people are not, and most people are not paying attention to pop culture. So here's the thing. Risk-averse Hollywood is always looking for things. And for the most part, lately, Stephen King has been on a roll. I don't know if you've seen, every time I watch Watchmen or his Dark Materials, there's ads for the adaptation of The Outsider, which actually comes out of King's Mr. Mercedes universe series of books. It's sort of a spin-off from those books. Well, HBO has adapted The Outsider, and it looks to be a slam dunk. Those trailers, if those trailers are anything to go by for The Outsider, it looks handsomely mounted. Jason Bateman's in it. Really, really looks good. Now, I read The Outsider, and I got to say, its central conceit, little goofy. I want to see how they make it work, because I found the book, I really enjoyed the book. It has a great mystery, but I didn't find its revelations to be all that convincing. So I'm going to be curious to see how they handle that. But Stephen King usually is right up there. But I have to say, even reading Dr. Sleep myself when it came out, I liked it, but I didn't love it. For a sequel to The Shining, there's a lot of stuff going on in it that I don't know if I really bought. But I think what it comes down to is, like I said on the John Campea show, yes, Ewan McGregor. Everyone loves Ewan McGregor. They do. When you watch, whether you're watching Trainspotting or watching him as Obi-Wan Kenobi, I I mean, I love Trains. You want to see a great sequel? Trainspotting 2 is a great sequel, but not, people aren't necessarily running out to the theater to see Ewan McGregor. They just aren't, even though he's a great actor, and I really enjoy most of the things that he's been in. And I can't wait for the Kenobi series. But also, the fact is, The Shining, I think a lot, Pete, unless you watch the trailers, and we watch all the trailers, but a lot of people necessarily don't. They hear it's coming out, or they saw a commercial, or they read about it. The Doctor Sleep is not only a sequel to the book, but it's kind of it's a hybrid sequel. It's a sequel to Kubrick's film. And if you don't know Kubrick's film, you're going to go and kind of be lost. It's not something that stands on its own, which I think is a problem. And also, while horror with families is always good, this is still the story. And even though there's a young child actress in it who's outstanding, and you've got Rebecca Ferguson as Rose the Hat, who is smoking hot with her Slash hat on, if you're a Guns N' Roses fan. There's a lot of elements in this that make it desirable, but it's not the kind of movie, even okay, I read the book and I wasn't like, I got to go out and see that. I just think that sometimes, even though the tracking numbers are there, sometimes things just don't work. And I think the industry, everyone says Hollywood's out of touch with what people want. I don't think that's true. But I do think that sometimes Hollywood is out of touch with itself. They think nowadays everything's based on an IP. So they think, okay, my risk has been mitigated by making these kinds of sequels. But when you're making sequels to things that are either too old, or Blade Runner was not a hit in the first place. So the idea that something like Blade Runner 2049 would be a great moneymaker was sort of based on, I think, a wrong assumption. We all want to believe that, oh yes, Blade Runner is just as revered in the rest of the world as it is amongst Hollywood circles. And that's simply not true. And I think, look, we all grew up with The Shining, but I think for audiences today, especially people watching horror films or coming of horror age over the last quarter century, I don't necessarily think The Shining is as up there as it was when we were younger. It's just like, things like The Exorcist. People think about The Exorcist. I think it's probably the greatest horror film ever made, at least as far as I'm concerned. But again, it's not the kind of thing that you're going to love if you grew up on the paranormal movies or the Insidious films or the Conjuring movies, the James Wan jump scare movies. It's a different era. And you can't necessarily immediately expect that different era to deliver. Anyway, there's another article I want to read about this because I think it's really really interesting. I'll jump in though to the chat and see if anybody has anything to say. Oh, you do. Wow. Okay. The James Eversole Jr. Movie Podcast is here. Hey, Rob, who is your top 5 movie characters not based on comic books, not a comic or a book, purely born on screen? Well, as I talk about it a lot, James, I'm gonna. This is a great question, but first of all, I'm gonna come off with George Sanders as theater critic Addison DeWitt in Joseph Makowitz's 1950 Best Picture winner, All About Eve. All About Eve is one of my favorite movies. I would say all the characters, Margot Channing, Eve Harrington, all the characters. I'll just say All About Eve, every character in that movie. I love that movie. Love it, love it, love it. So, but I would say Addison DeWitt because wow. And the characters in another movie called Sweet Smell of Success, Burt Lancaster's character. Oh, but anyway, I know that's probably not what you wanted to hear. Favorite characters not based off a comic or a book, just born purely on the big screen. Well, that's really limiting because it's tough because so many of my favorite movies are based on novels. But since you're just asking this question, I have to dig deep and think about it. I'd have to say, I don't know if The Verdict, it might be based on a book. I love Paul Newman's character in The Verdict, and his name escapes me right now. Indiana Jones. Gotta say Indiana Jones. Inspired by movie serials, but a creation for the big screen. Joe Gideon, the character that Roy Scheider plays in all that jazz. Gosh, Hal 9000 from Kubrick's 2001. Now I know you're going to say, well, wait a minute, Rob, there is a 2001 novel. Yes, but the novel was written in conjunction with the film. It was born out of the movie. So I'm going to say Hal, it's a tough question. I got to come back to that. That's a tough one. A top 5 list. That's a tough question. Factual Opinion is here. Dr. Sleep movie was a wonderful gift for my birthday. Factual Opinion, every time you submit a chat, and I thank you for supporting the channel, and I see your Dr. Manhattan logo. Well, it's, what is it? Hydrogen? Is it the hydrogen atom? I think about, what do you think about Watchmen? The 4th episode of Watchmen. I have my own theories. I still can't decide whether I love Watchmen or if it's the most pretentious TV show ever. I don't understand how anybody who hasn't read the comic book or seen the movie would understand anything that's going on, but we'll see. I have a feeling I'm either it'll be the first Damon Lindelof thing I've actually really liked, or, because right now I'm on the fence, or I'm going to wind up hating it. I can't believe, to me, there's been some good stuff going on, but it's 4 hours long already. We've got 5 hours left. Next week will take us past the halfway point. I don't know. Jeffrey Mouse says, I first found out about Jolin and Ashley with their Red Shirt Diaries. Pretty good stuff. Their comic book history stuff is quite good also. Well, Jeffrey Mao, you are correct. Ashley, if you haven't seen the Star Trek fan film, The Red Shirt Diaries, it's very funny. And Ashley stars in it, and her husband, Jason Inman. They made it together, and they also did their Jupiter Jet comic. They're delightful people. Christopher Freeze says, your thoughts on the BBC series Red Dwarf? Red Dwarf is fine. There's a lot of people that like Red Dwarf. Now, here's to me, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy cornered a market on a certain kind of sci-fi comedy. And Red Dwarf, to me, even though maybe it's unfair, I like Red Dwarf, but I don't love Red Dwarf, and I certainly haven't sat down and watched it all religiously. I've watched sporadic episodes, but it keeps coming back, and I appreciate that. And there's a lot of fans of Red Dwarf. I like my science fiction, fantasy, and horror serious, unless, of course, it's Red Dwarf is good, but Hitchhiker's Guide, for whatever reason, I loved Hitchhiker's Guide. I heard the radio show first before I saw, of course, the TV show, but and then the movies, and then I it was the radio show, the books, the TV show, the movie, but Red Dwarf, yeah. Timbula the Spider Monkey says, gotta go to work, so I'll watch this about 10 p.m., but wanted to give you some love for gummy bears. Well, Tim, thank you. Also, at the risk of you never talking to me again, go 49ers. Hey, listen, bruh, just because you live down under in the land of Oz does not mean that I should have to put up with, on my own channel, somebody coming here and you fair weather 49er fans, so they're undefeated. You know what? They're number one. I get it in the NFC West. But you know what? The Seahawks are number 2, and the Seahawks are going to take down the 49ers and ruin their perfect season. And I look forward to that. It happens tonight in a mere few hours. So here's to the Jedi Knights of the Pacific Northwest and Uncle Pete. Bring home that victory tonight, boys. But thanks for supporting the channel, Tim. Michael Elliott says, Blade Runner 2049 was one of the most spot-on sequels to a movie ever. You must see it if you have any love for the first one and social science fiction. Michael, I love Blade Runner 2049, even though Brian Fuller said some really interesting things I hadn't considered to me. But I love the film. I think it's a great movie. I really, really enjoy it. I really do. I think it's great. And it's one of the best sequels I've ever seen. And it has one of the best sound mixes I've ever heard in a movie. So I agree with you. I think it's spot on, and it certainly works really well. It doesn't diminish Blade Runner at all. It adds to the universe and asks some very intriguing questions. So I am with you. Alexander Wilson is here. Anecdotaling, I had friends who watched The Shining who didn't know anything about sleep or that it was I had friends who watched The Shining who didn't know anything about sleep or that it was a sequel to it. No relationship was established. Well, that's okay. I guess that's good, right? Or did you mean to say you had friends? Oh, you had friends who watched The Shining who didn't know anything about sleep or that it was a sequel to it. Or sleep, maybe you want to say that reversed. No relationship was established. Yeah, but I mean, it is about Danny Torrance, and they do flashback. They recreate scenes from The Shining in the movie. There's the characters. But again, if you didn't know, CJ Dunn says, hey, great Viceroy verisimilitude. Have you had a chance to see Dark Fate yet? If so, what are your thoughts? Sorry, I've been absent. I've been in Fort Irwin, California for some training. Happy Veterans Day. You know, I need to see Dark Fate, but I'm going to get there. Alexander Wilson says, saw Dark Fate. It was lazy. They rehashed elements from T3, including a machine power cell to stop the Terminator. The VFX also weren't good. You know, I've heard that. It's funny. People are mixed. People like Terminator's okay. I really like it. I don't like it. It rehashes so many elements. I think the real problem with the Terminator movie is it is, in fact, the basic premise is a Terminator has come back in time to kill a future resistance leader. That's what it is. And we have to stop this Terminator. And like the past, whether it's Terminator 2, Terminator 3, Terminator 4, the Terminators are a little bit different, have little things but it's essentially the same story. There's no wrinkle to the formula. Anyway, let me get back to Dr. Sleep. I want to read this article. This was published at 6:40 a.m. today. And this is from the Hollywood Reporter, and it was written by Pamela McClintock. Dr. Sleep's dismal $14 million debut terrifies Hollywood. The Veterans Day box office turned into a bloody battleground for a slew of films unable to break through and convince consumers to turn out to the multiplex in force. The timing couldn't have been worse, considering that Disney Plus, a symbolic reminder of the encroachment of streamers, launches November 12th. The biggest shock was the Stephen King adaptation Dr. Sleep, a sequel to The Shining that had been tracking to debut to 25 to 30 million domestically. The R-rated horror thriller boasted all the right credentials, good reviews, the Stephen King brand, and backing from Warner Brothers, home of horror label New Line. Instead, Dr. Sleep went into a coma. It opened to 14.1 million domestic and lost to Roland Emmerich's big-budget indie spectacle Midway, which took in 17.5 million. Not that Midway is a victory, considering its $100 million production budget. Executives at Warner Brothers didn't do their usual round of Sunday morning box office phone calls and behind the scenes scrambled to understand what went so wrong. The studio has suffered a string of misses in the past few months. Exceptions include Joker, which is days away from clearing $1 billion globally, which is astonishing, and It Chapter 2, another King adaptation that has earned $460 million to date. Joker alone will spin profits of $600 million, more than enough to absorb any losses from The Goldfinch and Dr. Sleep, which cost a net $47 million to produce after rebates and tax incentives. Warner's wasn't the only one feeling the heat over the Veterans Day frame. Universal's rom-com Last Christmas, starring Emilia Clarke and Henry Golding, underwhelmed with $11.6 million, and in the second upset of the weekend, was passed up by Paramount's family picture Playing with Fire, which grossed a very modest $12.5 million. This weekend was like some weird alternative box office universe, said Paul Dargabedian of ComScore, noting that the year-to-date box office revenue continues to trail behind 2018 by 5.5%, but is still ahead of 2017 and other years. Put another way, on the same weekend a year ago, The Grinch Who Stole Christmas debuted to $67.6 million, while Bohemian Rhapsody grossed $31.2 million in its second outing. And 2 years ago, on the same weekend, Thor Ragnarok, then its sophomore outing, collected $57.1 million, followed by a $29.7 million opening for the holiday-themed Daddy's Home 2 and a $28.7 million launch for Murder on the Orient Express. Midway and Dr. Sleep hit theaters 1 week after Terminator Dark Fate bombed in its global debut. In an era where IP is the gold standard of Hollywood, Dark Fate and Dr. Sleep are an especially bitter pill to swallow. Warner's was so keen on Dr. Sleep that movie studio chief Toby Emmerich had already struck a deal with director Mike Flanagan and his Intrepid Pictures to script a sequel whose working title is Halloran, drawn from the character who appears in both The Shining and Dr. Sleep. Box office analysts say Dr. Sleep ran too long, roughly 151 minutes, and that many members of the millennial and Gen Z generations aren't necessarily familiar with The Shining, which was directed by Stanley Kubrick, starring Jack Nicholson and Shelley Duvall. The Shining, despite being a cult classic, just doesn't have traction with younger audiences. 39 years was too long between sequels, says Jeff Bach of Exhibitor Relations. Damn right it was. Damn right it was. Adds Wall Street analyst Eric Handler, I thought Dr. Sleep would do well. The types of films out this weekend seem like good fits for the schedule, including Even Playing with Fire, which has no competition in the family film category. Are people only looking for blockbusters right now? You know, there's always these Monday morning quarterbacking of, and what's really interesting, nobody ever Monday morning quarterbacks like hits, really. They only look back at these films that were supposed to be hits, and everyone says when a hit comes along, maybe with the exception of something like Joker, oh yeah, we always knew it was going to be a hit. But what I've always thought about this kind of thing is, yes, having the reason Hollywood loves IP, the reason Hollywood loves any kind of an intellectual property is because it mitigates the risk of making a film. Something has already succeeded in one other medium or some other format, and you can turn that into something that has name recognition. Even if it's a podcast, you can turn it into, whether it's a documentary series or whether it's a limited series on a streaming service or a movie or whatever. As long as something appeared in one other medium, that mitigates the risk, because making something that's brand new and unique to Hollywood these days, because of how much things cost, is a big, big risk. But here's the thing. Not every IP is guaranteed to be a hit. You really need to and not every Stephen King story is going to be a massive hit either. Remember when Shawshank Redemption came out? By the way, look at how that movie was marketed. To this day, I still talk to people about the Shawshank Redemption, and nobody, well, not nobody, but many people have no idea that the Shawshank Redemption was based on a novella that appeared in Stephen King's 1982 collection, Different Seasons. By the way, along with two other movie, Bryan Singer's Apt Pupil and Rob Reiner's Stand By Me, which appeared as The Body. The only other novella in that book was The Breathing Method. So you had a collection that had 4 novellas in it, and 3 of them were turned into movies. And I don't know, people might be hard pressed to know that both Stand By Me and The Shawshank Redemption were Stephen King stories, because they don't overtly bear a resemblance to what people think of as being Stephen King stories, which is sort of crazy. And talking about Dr. Sleep, I mean, even the ad campaign has little Danny Torrance on his trike on the one sheets, on the key art. And you're like, well, wait a minute. Okay. I mean, I would have, if I had made or was promoting Dr. Sleep, I would have sold it as its own thing. But I don't think that's the only reason. But yeah, I mean, if it was just being sold as a horror film, I think a lot of people thought to themselves, especially younger people, if they found out that, hey, this is a sequel to The Shining, people would be like, well, I'm not going to go. I need to see The Shining first. And if they'd sold it as its own thing, and indeed it works without having seen The Shining, although the movie heavily lays into Kubrick's The Shining, I think it could have worked on its own and allow people to then discover. I mean, what is it about The Shining? We saw the Overlook Hotel depicted in Ready Player One. That wasn't even in the book. Well, at least not the way it was depicted in the film. So we've now had, weirdly enough, over the course of the last couple of years, 2 movies that recreated Kubrick's The Shining. It's a very interesting thing. And yet, I think a lot of people who saw Ready Player One had not seen The Shining, because why would they have? I mean, how many times do you go back and watch a movie that's 39 years old? Anyway, it's got to be the right IP. It can't just be any IP. But what do you guys think of all this? What do you think? Why did The Shining sequel, Doctor Sleep, not burn it up at the box office? But like, Alexander Wilson says, the marketing for Doctor Sleep didn't establish a relationship between it and The Shining. My friends didn't know that McGregor was playing Danny. Yeah, that might be true too. Maybe they didn't lean heavily enough into the fact that it was a sequel. That's interesting that people didn't know. Willow Yang says, speaking of Last Christmas, have you finished writing your Club Tropicana script yet? Club Tropicana. All that's missing is the sea, fun and sun. There's enough for everyone. Let me just tell you, of course, Club Tropicana. There was the triptych of great first Wham songs. There's Club Tropicana, of course. There is Young Guns and Wham Rap. And if you don't know them, you should. How can you not know? Shame on you. There are videos for all three. You can find them all on YouTube right now. Of course, people know that Last Christmas is all about George Michael's songs, and George Michael, Simon Le Bon, vocalists who I dearly love back in the day and still to this day. I mean, George Michael, of course, sadly is not with us. I wish he had recorded a Bond theme song before he died, because I do think that George Michael is one of the great pop vocalists of all time. Maybe not as good as Elton John, but as far as Brit pop vocalists go, I think Elton John and Freddie Mercury, George Michael, incredible men, all that I would love to have seen. I did see George Michael. I want to say, it was the Listen Without Prejudice tour that I saw him at the Forum here in LA. Put on a great show. Huge fan. But maybe I should write my Club Tropicana script. Willow, if I do, you're going to have to be a part of it. I'd love to. We should all go. Maybe we'll have a Robservations outing, and we'll create our own Club Tropicana where the drinks are free and there's enough for everyone. But I have not finished writing it yet. Koba is here. Koba says, are you excited for 1917? Oh my God. And what are some of your favorite movies set in World War I, lest we forget? Well, I think my favorite World War I movie, speaking of Stanley Kubrick, is Paths of Glory. Paths of Glory is an incredible movie, and it really gets into the futility of war. And if you guys haven't seen Paths of Glory, it's an incredible film. There's something about World War I movies. I think, isn't Jean-Pierre Genet A Very Long Engagement also a World War I set film? World War I is a really interesting milieu. But so Koba asks about 1917. 1917 is Sam Mendes's new movie that is actually based, from what I understand, on a story his grandfather used to tell. It's a true story, apparently. And they've shot it. Roger Deakins, Academy Award winner for Skyfall. He didn't win for Skyfall. He won for Blade Runner 2049. The great cinematographer, who also, by the way, shot The Shawshank Redemption. Speaking that we're on topic, he shot 1917 to all look like the whole movie takes place in one shot. It's basically in real time over the course of 90 minutes or 2 hours or something. Can't wait to see 1917. I think it's going to be great. So absolutely. Dale M sends a super chat, says, gotta show my support to my favorite YouTube channel. Thanks, Rob. Hello to the Post-Geek Singularity. And to the most amazing woman on the internet, Willow Yang. Oh, and the most amazing women on the internet, Willow and Vesna. I hope you're all well. I don't know, Dale. I think you're just trying to get a double date with the two of them. Come on. Because, judging by what goes on in the chat out there, I'm sure the two of them together would rock your world. Of course, the performance anxiety you would feel, man, I can't even imagine. I can't even imagine what you'd have to live up to. That'd be tough. That'd be rough. But you know what? I do appreciate that you're a man who I think would step up to that challenge. So good on you for that. And thanks for the support of the channel. Ladies and gentlemen, I got letters to read. I got so many letters to read. It's crazy. let's see. I like this letter. This letter I'm going to read. I'm going to start today. This letter comes from, let's see, Rick B. Dear brethren and sisterhood of the singularity, I by no means wish to offend anyone with this letter as I write it objectively, although with a bias of my generation. I sit here wondering about all that's being debated and can't help but ponder if the old adage, be careful what you wish for, has reared its ugly head with all of this lazy writing and toxic fandom that runs rampant in this day and age. I was born in 1966, the same year as the birth of Star Trek, even though I only remember seeing it in syndication, having to run home from school to catch it on TV, and still having no control of which episode they gave us to watch. We had to take the good with the bad. Same with the Creature feature on Sunday night. We had to wait days or months till the next episode or movie played on TV, or seeing movies might be played only once and you never got to see it again. So as a child, we had our imaginations to carry us through. Who here remembers getting into trouble for tearing up her flower beds, building roads for matchbox cars, or flooding sections of the yard or garden to build rivers, and broke off her favorite trees, building bridges and defensive positions for week-long epic backyard battles waged by Green Army men, some of which are still lost in the dirt and continue to pop up every now and then, causing smiles and great memories. Or building AMT models of starships and Klingon battle cruisers and absolutely peeing your pants, getting Franz Joseph's Star Trek technical manual for Christmas, saving money to buy the AMT phaser, communicator, and tricorder model, and gluing Velcro on them so they would be able to stick on your pants. The point is, we had to use imagination to fill in the blanks, and we loved any chance when we could get more. I love Starlog, Fangoria, always leaving us wanting more, all the while honing our imaginations. We wished for more, and through technical innovation, it now exists via the internet, YouTube, realistic toys with sounds and lights, video games, and the ability to watch anything at any time with the ability to skip to the next battle scene. Everything you want at your fingertips. So I believe the loss of childhood is the death of imagination and true creativity. With great respect, Rick B. Steady as she goes. Well, I don't think this is an offensive letter. But I know what you're saying. Like we have all of this great stuff, and no one's happy. Everybody's upset. It's like that old Louis CK routine. Everything is awesome, but everybody's unhappy. I think you just nailed a big difference between our generation. I mean, yours and my generation. A big difference between us and, say, a newer generation. Because when we were growing up, there was very little that was considered great when it came to science fiction, fantasy, and horror. There was stuff that was good, but mostly for genre aficionados, but there wasn't a lot of stuff that was great. There was probably, up until Star Wars came out, 10 science fiction films that really could be considered great. I think beginning with Metropolis in 1927, then you jump all the way into the 50s where you had like War of the Worlds, or War of the Worlds, The Day the Earth Stood Still, Forbidden Planet, movies like that. And then in the 60s, you had two, basically. You had 2001 and you had Planet of the Apes. So when we grew up, there just wasn't very much of the good stuff. There wasn't a lot of it. And we as genre fans, we liked all those genre trappings. Cut to today, there is a plethora, a myriad, just a cornucopia of great stuff that we all love. And it's amazing that we live in this day and age where we have so much greatness to enjoy. And what I find really interesting is that I think a lot of today's audiences didn't understand what, say, our generation learned, is that even if you got 2 or 3 really great things, like I always go back to the James Bond franchise. I grew up as a kid loving James Bond, and when I was a kid, I didn't understand. I did not discern. I mean, I had Bond movies that were more that I liked better than other Bond movies, but basically I just liked James Bond. And it wasn't until I became a teenager and got my first VCR and started really watching the Bond franchise at will, because you had to wait till ABC television played it. And then when I would get them on tape, I would watch them over and over again, and I started studying them, and it was very apparent which Bond films were great. And it was also apparent that there wasn't as many good Bond films as there were not so good Bond films. So I grew up okay with that. I also grew up loving the Planet of the Apes franchise, which is also a franchise filled with diminishing returns. There were 5 original Planet of the Apes films: Planet of the Apes, Beneath Planet of the Apes, Escape from the Planet of the Apes, Conquest of the Planet of the Apes, and Battle for the Planet of the Apes. And I love them all, but even I knew that I loved the first 2. I mean, Planet of the Apes is a classic, but Beneath the Planet of the Apes, with the mutants and the bomb and Charlton Heston, and I mean, and then the end when they blow up the they blow up the world. I love that. And then, of course, the goofiness, the funny Escape from the Planet of the Apes that ends in a very heartbreaking way. And why not? Because the entire Planet of the Apes franchise is sort of known in a way. What's funny about the Planet of the Apes franchise is 4 of those movies end very apocalyptically, and the one that Battle for the Planet of the Apes, the last one, ends with a bit of hope. But 4 movies, but it's still diminishing returns, even though you loved them. But nowadays, there's no such thing as Star Wars can't be allowed to have just an okay movie. Like, I like Solo. I thought Solo was pretty good. But pretty good is not enough when it comes to Star Wars. Everybody wants their life changed, which I find interesting since we lived through the prequels. But, you know, all this fighting and even my beloved Star Trek franchise, there is a bunch of mixed bag films. The first 10 are certainly a mixed bag. I want them all to be good, but when you live through that, it's like, all right, it wasn't very good. Okay. But nowadays, the vitriol, what I never would have thought to really hate creators. I mean, did I hate Sidney Furie? Did I go off on him because of Superman 4? No, I didn't. But I certainly developed a healthy dislike of J.J. Abrams when I walked out of Star Trek 09. I mean, the first time I saw any of it, I saw 20 minutes of it on the Paramount lot, and I really was upset. I was really, really, really angry, and I never felt that way. When I went and saw View to a Kill and reviewed it for my high school newspaper, I was like, that was not a good Bond movie. But I didn't hate anybody that made it. I didn't feel a hatred for them. And I guess the difference is, you know, we live in a world now where there is so much good stuff and there is so much. How do you not make a great Star Wars movie when you are surrounded? We live in a world where there are so many great Star Wars stories that you could delve into for research. That's the thing that makes me that is the most irksome, is that there are so many great stories within these franchises in other mediums, whether they're comic book stories, whether they are novels, especially with Star Trek. There's many, many, many Star Trek novels that are worthy of adaptation, and nobody's ever done it. You know, nobody's ever done it. And I don't understand that. I don't understand why, when they made Alien versus Predator, they didn't go back to that first Dark Horse comic series, which would have made a fine film. There have been Alien miniseries like Hive. There have been countless talented artists and writers who have told stories in our very favorite universes that are never tapped when it comes to these big screen adventures. Like, why wouldn't you go back and look into the frustrating thing for Star Wars is that the extended universe already told all of these post Return of the Jedi stories, and they did it. I mean, not all of them, but they did a much better job. I mean, they did. So why wouldn't you go into that? Lucasfilm owns that stuff. Why not look into that and go, oh, why don't I take it amount? Why don't I cherry pick of all of my favorite stuff? And some of it, by the way, has been, just not overtly. What they haven't done is taken the actual storylines, and there's no reason. Like, you should not be making a movie. We should not be in a world where Rise of Skywalker, whether the rumors are true that have been reported online by many different websites that I particularly enjoy watching, if those rumors are true, how did we get to this point? When there's all of this great storytelling material that has been out there that you can go buy and read, how do you not make great Star Wars movies. I mean, it was such an interesting thing that they made that choice. They made, the corporations made the choice. They mandate we have to have all new characters and new stories and new this or new that. When really, when you're thinking about Star Wars, is like, you got Han, Luke, Leia, Chewie, R2, 3PO. Like, don't you want to give them a last hurrah? You would think that would be the first thing. If you wanted to introduce new characters, great. But give our classic characters one last great movie to go out in. It's such a no-brainer. It's such a strange thing for me to think about, that we lived in a world where they never did that. They brought back all of the classic Star Wars characters and never put them together in a scene to work together. It's so weird. Like, you think about that and go, I don't know what deal they struck with George Lucas, but it seems that anybody who is doing, even from a corporate standpoint, that is a no-brainer. Of course, it didn't happen. Anyway, I want to thank you for your letter. By the way, how cool is it that if you live on East Coast time, you are, what are you? You're now 15 hours away from the premiere of The Mandalorian. Disney Plus goes online at 6 a.m. East Coast time, 3 a.m. West Coast time. The Mandalorian, that's right, the first live-action Star Wars show, not episode, that would be the Star Wars Holiday Special, but the first live-action Star Wars show goes online in a mere 15 hours. And remember, there's 2 episodes of The Mandalorian this week. There's Tuesday's episode and Friday's episode, with new episodes following every Friday. Pretty exciting. I got to say, man, I am very, very, very excited about the new Mandalorian series. I think it's going to be great. I can't wait. Captain Robert April is here. Captain Robert April, by the way, was in a very bad car accident. I'm glad to see that he's here and he is writing and chatting. You should be in bed, sir. I suspect Cameron made Dark Fate to finally kill that franchise. Yes, I'm in severe pain. Robert April was in a terrible car accident. He lost his feline member of the family. He has a GoFundMe page set up, and any help you can throw his way. He's a longtime member of the Post-Geek Singularity. But I'm sorry you're in pain. I'm glad you're still alive, though, sir. And because, don't you want to be alive so you can rip on Rise of Skywalker like everybody else? No, I mean, it's always, what do they say in Full Metal Jacket? The dead only know one thing. It is better to be alive. Good to see you at least out and about as far as this chat is concerned. And please say hi to your wife for me. I hope you get better soon. And I hope everything works out. There's so many letters. Oh, this is interesting. I like this letter. I think this comes from somebody new. This is a change of pace. This letter comes from David Jarikwi. Jarikwi. It's spelled Jaurequi. Jarikwi. What a cool name. However you pronounce it, it's a great name. Hi, Rob. I'm not sure if this is letter material. It might not be, as it's a bit technical. No. It's perfectly. I'm going to read this. When you look at lots of franchises, you will notice that many of them have HD versions now. Sadly, there is no HD version of Babylon 5, which is really such a wonderful show. It has great writing and was a technical pioneer in the VFX industry at that time. There have been lots of rumors and talks about CGI assets being lost and all kinds of other theories and myths. As a matter of fact, there are still Babylon 5 assets around, and they, at least in my opinion, could be used for an HD remaster. They can be opened with a modern version of Lightwave 3D, and while some functionality inside Lightwave has changed in the last 25 years, most of the scene files do still work. I wonder if Warner Brothers even knows about that. It's sad that this show hasn't been picked up for an HD remaster, and I fear with each passing year, it will be more difficult to find more of the original CGI assets. More and more content is shown in HD and 4K. It would be a shame if Babylon 5 would get lost in the standard definition nirvana. People are so used to HD, it would be easy for Babylon 5 to find new viewers and fans when it's still at very bad. It won't be easy. It won't be easy for Babylon 5 to find new viewers and fans when it's still at a very bad standard definition quality. I do not know what it takes to make a Babylon 5 remaster happen. Well, I guess it's a lot of money, but the existing CGI assets would surely save considerable amounts. Maybe all it needs is the right person, someone at the Warner Brothers in the right position to know about this to get things started. I will give you a link to a zip file with 2 short examples. 3 scenes from Babylon 5 episodes remastered for HD. It does not look modern, but I thought it would be best to keep the original style while enhancing things like lighting and additional editing. Thank you for taking the time to read this. Keep up the great work you are doing with your observations, and best wishes in the future. Kind regards, David J. Well, this is a question I think is really important to address. And it's something I know something about because obviously I worked on the Star Trek The Next Generation remaster. Here's the thing that a lot of people do not understand. Shows like Star Trek The Next Generation and Deep Space Nine and Voyager and Babylon 5 were originally shot on film, which is great. Just like TV shows have been shot on film for a very, very long time. Pre-2010, really. So a lot of shows were shot, most shows were shot on film. The live action was shot on film. With science fiction shows of beginning really in the mid-'80s, the first one I remember is the Twilight Zone revival from '85. What they would do in order to save money, because these shows, if they were set in outer space or you had all kinds of crazy visual effects, they would finish the shows on videotape, which seems, I know, it's crazy. So what that means is they would shoot a film in 35 millimeter, or they'd shoot a show like Babylon 5 or Star Trek The Next Generation or Voyager or Deep Space Nine or the Twilight Zone revival. They would shoot it on film, but then they would transfer the film to which at the time was a standard definition videotape format. And I'll keep the technical issues to a minimum. Our video standards at the time, NTSC video, was basically, well, think about it this way. Film, to keep it easier, film is basically 4K or above. Now, we've only had 4K discs for the last couple of years, but that's what film is. It's 4K and above. Our standard definition video was substantially like 12 times less in quality. 12 times less. High definition is 1920 by 1080. Well, basically, standard definition video was 480 by 680, 620 by 480, something like that. It was terrible. There was 420. There's a possible 525 lines of resolution total, but then mostly things were 425 and less. It was horrible. The video was horrible. So what you were doing, you were basically taking 4K film and transferring it to video, which made it bad, but it allowed you to do visual effects. I'm doing a terrible job explaining this. Remember how VHS used to look? Imagine if you took your beautiful film and you transferred it to VHS and you finished your show on VHS. It was edited on VHS. It was all the visual effects were created, because when you're dealing with CG effects or even model effects, like with Next Generation, CG was in the 90s because we had that technology, but you were still finishing at basically VHS resolution. It was better than VHS, but I'm just for the time being. So what happened with shows like Next Gen, Voyager, Deep Space Nine, and Babylon 5 is while the live action material was shot on film, they were finished, all the post-production and all the visual effects. Now, this is true of Babylon 5. The visual effects were rendered at standard definition, standard video definition, NTSC video definition. So the live action footage and the video footage was all finished in standard def, which is now in our high def 4K world useless. You cannot watch standard definition on Netflix now. It looks god awful. It's gauzy. It's terrible. There's no true blacks. It's horrible. So what they did for Star Trek The Next Generation, which they've done now for shows like Miami Vice or The X-Files, is they went back and they got the original negative. And in the case of Next Generation, they had to take Next Generation all the way through post-production. It was just as if they'd just shot it yesterday. They took all of the negative, and rather than transferring it to NTSC video, Next Generation was, at the time, scanned into beautiful 2K. They didn't really have 4K yet, and if they did, they wouldn't have done it because it would have been that much more expensive. But they scanned it in as 2K images. And with Next Generation, the visual effects were mostly models that were shot. So they scanned all that work in at 2K. So The Next Generation, which was a show that was posted on video to keep the costs down, which the color was never great. The image was never sharp. The blacks were never really black. It was more of an inky, gauzy gray, smeary gray. Suddenly, if you look at The Next Generation, especially the Blu-rays, it was a different show. It was startling how great it was. Now, say the original Star Trek, a lot of shows, before they were posted on video, before the mid-'80s, they would cut the negative, just like a movie. So you'd have you'd pull out the old Star Trek, for instance, or any show that was made pre-mid-'80s that wasn't posted on video, and you could scan that negative, and boom, you could scan it in 4K, you could scan it at 2K, whatever you want to scan it at, and you've got this beautiful version, as long as you go back to the original negative, and it looks incredible. Well, shows like Deep Space Nine, Voyager, Babylon 5, they don't have negatives, cut negatives. All they have are videotapes because they finished at standard def. So the only way that you can get Babylon 5 to be in, say, high definition is you'd have to do what they do with Next Generation. You have to go back and get the negative, and you'd have to scan the negative again, and then you would have to have somebody go in and recreate. You can't just re-render because the technology is better. The backgrounds, imagine if Babylon 5 backgrounds or Babylon 5 effects were just rendered out at 2K, they would still look very video toastery. You'd need to have somebody go in and redesign. Maybe you could keep the shots the same, but you'd have to redetail the models. You'd have to make everything better. So you'd have to scan all that out. So you'd have to scan the negative, and then you'd have to rebuild the visual effects at a higher resolution and scan those out too. And then you could put together a high definition version of the film. But it requires, to do the 178 episodes of Next Generation, it took 4 years and a team of about 30 people working every day, not weekends, but every day to do that. And unfortunately, there are a number of shows that have slipped through the cracks that because of this, you'd need someone. I mean, Next Generation, it cost, well, I'd say about 15 million, a little less, but let's just call it $15 million and 30 people working for 4 years to put all 178 episodes of Star Trek out on Blu-ray and now on streaming. Now, in order to do that, you have to know that you have a viable marketplace by which you're going to get that money back. Unfortunately, as streaming began its climb to the top of the heap, when the Next Generation discs first were released, because how many times you have to buy Star Trek The Next Generation, even diehard fans didn't understand what the restoration entailed and how great they looked. It was truly a revelation. But again, it didn't do very well. So luckily, Star Trek has worldwide syndication and streaming, so they'll eventually make their money back. But where's Babylon 5 going to go? Unless someone like Jeff Bezos comes along and says, hey, you know what? I'm going to drop the green, and I would love to restore all. I will spend the money. I will spend that $10 million. You got to find some big Babylon 5 fan and spend the money. Now, how are you going to get that money back? I don't know. But I think Babylon 5 it's a great, by the way, Babylon 5 would look incredible remastered in HD. So I hope it gets there. I hope one day somebody does that. By the way, a terrible explanation. If you'll look, hang on a second. You know what I'm going to do? I did an interview about this, and I'm going to put the link in the, hang on, TNG HD interview. Hang on. I did an interview, I want to say, with Trek News. Here it is. Okay. I found it. I love the internet. So I did a really long and I think much better explanation than I just gave about this I'm going to put it right now. I'm dumping it into the live chat. If you really want to know more, I get much more in depth into how this works. I just put that in the live chat. You can check that out. It's a much better explanation of where we're at. But it's really unfortunate. I mean, I loved getting like the restorations of Miami Vice and X-Files and things like that. And as I said, CBS also did The Stand. This was something that was finished on videotape. Actually, I don't know if it was finished on videotape. It was cut, but this just came out from CBS. They did this work as well. And this was something that they upgraded. I really want to know for the Stephen King's The Stand miniseries. Speaking of Stephen King, I love The Stand miniseries despite its low budget. And no, is it perfect? No. But the book is one of my favorite books, and I have a soft spot for this miniseries. But I liked it. But they did a beautiful restoration. They had to have gone back and rescanned all the original elements, so up into HD. And CBS also, let me just point out, they also did that. I haven't watched this yet, but this just came out. Although I do think this was just originally cut negative that they transferred. But The Stand, they had to go back in. They had to redo effects. I think they did a pretty good job with that. But if you want, read the article that I posted, because it's an in-depth article, and I did go into a great deal of how it's done, and it might be more helpful for somebody to look at that. The Richard is here. The Richard says, thoughts on a private chat with members specifically for The Mandalorian. We definitely will want to release our excitement, or God forbid, anything less. Well, as everyone knows, I have to do an extra chat at some point in order, because if I don't double up, my 300th episode will not be, I can't miss a show, by the way, till December 7th. Every day I have to do this, which is fine, but sometimes if work intrudes, I got to go on. But I was thinking about, I mean, everybody's going to do Mandalorian spoiler chats. I mean, I was thinking about doing one tomorrow night, because why not? Why not do a Mandalorian spoiler chat? Or, as a matter of fact, I got to wait until maybe I'll do a late night chat tomorrow night or something. When I do late night, I haven't done a nighttime chat on this show in a long time. It's tough to get, first of all, moderators, and I get I used to get just massive troll attacks when I would do, I mean, really nasty stuff. And I don't know if I want to do that, and I know John's going to do that, but maybe I'll do a Mandalorian spoiler discussion tomorrow night just for fun, because it's debut day, and why not? I don't usually do that, but I think that could be something to do, something fun to do. So maybe I will do that. This is interesting. I love when people write responses to other people's letters. Now, this Liam Kerrigan, our man, we got Lynn Hobday and Liam, who just had a birthday. She's an ex-Brit in Japan, but we've also got Liam Kerrigan is in Japan. And Liam wrote this. This is interesting. I like this a lot. In support of Ahmed Best and other bullying survivors. Hi, Rob. Greetings once again from Nagano, Japan. I've always praised your show for the positive way you go about things in the sense of friendship, communication, and cooperation that you generate both through your daily shows and through the Post-Geek Singularity Facebook group. That's why I was both saddened and angered to hear Franz Morhart's letter on today's show. I'm not sure if he was just trolling or if he's genuinely that incapable of empathy with his fellow man, but his views on bullying and mental health are as abhorrent as they are ignorant. Don't mince words, Liam. What do you really think? I don't normally like to single people out, but what he said in his letter was not only untrue, but also dangerous. It needs to be countered with truth, and that's why I'm writing to you today. As you may remember, I am a survivor of bullying, and I still carry mental scars to this day. I've written about it before, and it is not something I hide. But this isn't about me. This is about the inaccuracies of Franz's letter, that in the interest of balance, I hope you will allow me to correct. I will. I like balance. Firstly, he states that insults are within the realm of normal experience and suicide is not. Wrong and wrong again. Normalizing bullying, be it verbal, physical, or otherwise, only compounds the problem. It is not normal to be subjected to vitriolic insults on a daily basis, and no one should ever have to accept it. Secondly, what Franz and his ilk fail to realize, or perhaps they do and just choose to ignore it, is nuance. Different people have different breaking points, and what may seem innocuous to you can cause profound damage to another. The onus isn't on the victim to man up or deal with it. The onus is on you to not be a toxic prick. And if that person does end up harming themselves as a result of what you said or did to them, then it could very well end up being your fault, as various legal cases down the years have proven. Franz also erroneously asserts that people need to take responsibility for their own mental health and get professional help. Does he have any idea how much this professional help costs? Too much in most cases. And does he understand the stigma that comes with asking for such help? I speak as someone who has in the past been fired from a job for no reason other than informing my employer that I was undergoing treatment for a mental health issue. Such things are, sadly, not illegal in Japan, or indeed in much of the US and Canada. Mentally ill people, in a great many cases, lack the funds, the sense of perspective, and the assertiveness to stand up and ask for help. I find his emotionally tone-deaf attitude in this regard sickening. He goes on, in my personal experience, suicidal people are suffering, usually temporarily, from a mental imbalance. And what experience do you have exactly, Franz? Are you a certified doctor? Have you studied actual human psychology at an academic level? Well, I have, and my qualified opinion is that you are talking out of your ass and you have no idea how mental illness actually works. Depression, anxiety, suicidal tendencies are, in the vast majority of cases, not temporary. We may be able to control them with meds and therapy, if we can afford such things, but the imbalances are things that we have to live with forever. Do we have good and bad days? Sure we do. But the specter is always there, lurking in the background, and sometimes all it takes is one snarky comment from someone on the internet to set it all off again. You don't just go from suicidal to suddenly okay again. I sincerely hope Franz is just misinformed and that my belief was that he was being an attention-seeking troll with his letter to be proven wrong. And I hope he hears these words and is willing to act upon them. Please educate yourself on how mental illness actually works. I can even send you some reading recommendations if you are willing. More importantly, please try to show some empathy for others. It's all too easy to say, it's not my fault, he's a pussy. It takes real character and courage to instead step back, self-evaluate, and perhaps reconsider your own potentially toxic behavior. And finally, not just to Franz, but to everyone, I close with this. Next time you are tempted to give someone both barrels online, stop and think. Try and see things from their perspective. Try to consider what effect your words will have on them and ask yourself, what material benefit will I actually gain from abusing this person? In almost all cases, the short-term benefit to your own ego does not justify the risk of the serious harm your words could provide. As always, Rob, thanks for your daily dose of positivity, and I hope the next time we talk, it will be on a more upbeat topic. I've said my piece now. It's up to others how they choose to interpret it. All the best, Liam Kerrigan in Japan. Now, first of all, let me just say that I very much appreciated a lot of what Franz has written here in the past. And I've appreciated his contribution. That said, I do like the fact that Liam has written a letter. Now, yeah, he got a little pointed, but for the most part, he objected to what Franz said. He said, look, man, I'm perfectly willing to give you some literature to read. Now, while this got a little bit more personal than I would tend to like, I really appreciate the fact that Liam wrote in this way, and I would encourage everybody to do so. And again, there's no reason why we can't strenuously disagree with one another, but still provide an alternative or a rebuttal in a relatively respectful. I understand it's a little heated, but at the end of the day, Liam asked for. He said, "Look, I'm happy to provide you some reading material." I think what Liam is saying is interesting, and I completely agree with it. A good friend of mine, somebody who I've talked about a lot, who I've done some work for, had a very good friend of his. And I think I've talked about this before on the show, who killed himself. Now, the person who killed himself, who I actually also knew, met him a number of times. That person had tried to kill themselves before, and it was not something he was intent on doing it, and eventually, after a number of years, succeeded in doing so. And I think that, because you can't see it, it's hard when people tell you that they have issues, that they need help. You should take that on face value. Just because somebody doesn't look like they need some kind of help, or maybe just a kind word, or they might really need deep psychological help or medicine or whatever it is, you should take them at face value as to what they're saying, because these things are absolutely very, very real. Whether you are bipolar, whether you are diagnosed with clinical depression, these are things that obviously people can't see. You're not walking around with one of those blimps from Blade Runner over you advertising your position. You don't people don't know. And so many people are walking around, and sometimes they don't even know. They don't even know why they're feeling the way they feel. They think that it might be controlled with medicine, but as Liam pointed out, they don't go and get that kind of help. So and especially online, there was a video that dropped this weekend of a kid. Clearly, he was LGBTQ. He seemed to be gay. And there was a younger kid that was bullying him in his classroom. And this kid stepped up and smacked him. Now, I don't necessarily advocate violence, but I have to say it was nice to see somebody stepping up and taking care of themselves. But yeah, I mean, look, I get people that say shitty things to me all the time online. I mean, it's just par for the course. But again, the whole point of my channel is to have a place where people can come and have discourse and talk to each other, even if we strenuously disagree. We can still have civil discourse, which is why I really liked Liam's letter. I think it's really important. And, I mean, I don't think that Franz was necessarily being an insensitive jerk necessarily. I don't think Franz maybe was ever given this perspective before, or in his experience, he's had a different time of it. And so that's the thing. Every person you meet has a story to tell you have yet to hear. And all we have to do is listen. So part of this, what we're doing here is it's a town meeting every day. It's a town. I have the stuff. I go back and I read what's going on in the chat during these conversations. And I'm like, is anybody even paying attention to what I'm saying? I guess it doesn't matter, because we're bringing together a community. And as long as, whether you're talking amongst yourselves or listening to me prattle on, it's a place where we can go and have discourse. And I think that's great. So, I want to thank Liam for writing in, and I want to thank Franz for writing in, and I want to thank Liam for responding to Franz, and maybe we'll hear back from Franz. I mean, I would like to hear back from Franz too. But again, so often we forget. You just never know. You never know where somebody's coming from, or what they're feeling, or what their mental state is. I mean, you never know what happens to people on a daily basis. And I always think it's better to err on the side of caution when it comes to other people. As I've always said, I mean, many people who've cared about me in my life have not understood why I seem to go so easy on people that have done me wrong, or done something that people would say is shitty to me. And I'm always saying, well, there's two sides to every story. And I don't know where they're coming from. All I know is how I can respond, and if it's not going to really get me down, then I can dwell on it or just move forward and keep doing what I'm doing. But it's tough. I mean, it's hard out there. And now with the anonymity of the internet providing cover for people, the stuff people say to one another online it's unbelievable. I think it's We live in a very interesting time. I always think it's better. It's just, why not just give people the benefit of the doubt, you know, and give people a little bit of it's always better to offer just a little bit of kindness to people. You know, if they turn out to be monumental douchebags, don't offer them the kindness anymore. But, you know, when you're mean to someone else, when you're intentionally mean to somebody, you're poisoning your own soul more than you're really hurting them, although you are hurting them as well. So unless they're really rich like J.J. Abrams, or they're responsible like Alex Kurtzman for Star Trek Discovery, I try and be nice to people. But yeah, we shall see. This next letter, oh, this is interesting. This one, another letter from Chris Pavoto. Pavoto, maybe one day I'll say his name right, but I like this letter. Good day, Rob, and the wonderful listeners. Oscars. Here's a discussion point I've been wondering about for a while now. Not to stir a pot that I was accused of, just wondering about the system in the entertainment landscape that the general audience might not fully be aware of. From 2001 to 2019, the largest viewership of the Oscars was in 2014 with 43.7 million people. That was domestic, but what about worldwide? Since then, the Oscars have been in a slow decline with a 3 million viewership bump up in 2019. However, the overall trend is a bit cloudy for the last 2 decades. Prior to Halloween, the 2020 MCU Oscar consideration came out with the 2 posters from Endgame. Suggestions were best costume design, sound mixing, sound editing, and film editing. I'm sure this one is near and dear to your heart, and it is. A few weeks prior to this, an interview came out with Robert Downey Jr. about the idea of being nominated for a Best Actor award from Endgame, which he's publicly released he doesn't want. Even though Robert Downey Jr. has said this, the MCU gave the list of Oscar nominations they desire, and ABC does broadcast the Oscars. Could a private, quiet, possible suggestion to the voters happen to get Robert Downey Jr. nominated to spike the number upwards, even though Endgame did break the bank this year and could be rewarding enough? I know my questions are generally not as elegant or entertaining to read as most of your listeners. Don't say that. This is a very entertaining and interesting question. My creative abilities are in different areas aside from the performing arts, and I'm truly grateful that you have read so many of my random nonsense letters live on your wonderful channel. First of all, I wouldn't read letters if I thought they were random nonsense, and I've really enjoyed the letters you send in, and most of them have been really interesting. In fact, I can't think of a letter that wasn't interesting, which is why I read it in the first place. But as I listen to those on YouTube that vent on the process or entertainment released, I like to know a bit more with your perspective as someone that lives in the business on the lesser known topics. As always, go Hawks, go Navy. Thank you, Chris. He puts parenthetically, the last name doesn't matter. Have I ever got it right? It's spelled P-E-V-O-T-O. Pavoto, right? It's Pavoto? Pavuto? Is it Pavuto? Well, either way, Chris, I want to thank you for writing in. I mean, as far as, look, studios always are putting out ad campaigns for actors that are in. I mean, you'd be surprised at how many people, how many different movies that you know will never win an Oscar have Oscar campaigns mounted for them. All of this falls under the auspices of marketing. And at the end of the day, anybody who shows up from the Oscars for from Endgame, I'm sure will be helpful. Because that's why people tune in. A lot of people tune in one night a year to see their favorite stars dressed up on the red carpet or something, and that's definitely a big part of it. But I have to say, one of the reasons that the Oscars are slipping is I do think our culture is changing. You know, the stars of today are not the stars of yesterday. Movie stars, you know, there's just as many. Elizabeth is going to hate for me to say this, but you know, Jeffree Star and Shane Dawson are as big, if not bigger, than a lot of the youth of America today than movie stars are. And even though they're big YouTube celebrities and entrepreneurs, you've got to recognize that we just live in a changing landscape. And I think that what? Oh, so Elizabeth says it's shallow. Yeah, unless you sold the conspiracy palette and you have Shane Dawson's merch that you sold out of, but then and made millions of dollars. But that's neither here nor there. But still, I think that what's we just live in a changing landscape, and yeah, look, the Oscars are political. They're a popularity contest. They're everything that everybody says. But if you really look at it in the long run, it's not like people who are talentless get nominated for Oscars. I mean, most people that get nominated and many people that win, even when they win for, if it's an upset, they usually got there for a reason. You can buy your way to an Oscar, I guess, but there are still voting members of the Academy. And look, we fans, we would love to see Robert Downey Jr. win an Oscar for Endgame, but even Robert Downey Jr., who was nominated, by the way, for Best Actor for his turn as Charlie Chaplin, which was an astonishing piece of work. If Robert Downey Jr. won a Best Actor award for playing Tony Stark, even he would be like, you know what, I really wish I'd won one for Chaplin because that was a little bit harder for me to do. And we just have to remember, I mean, I think it's important to know, you take the Oscars, any awards, you take them with a grain of salt. The Oscars are obviously the biggest as far as movies are concerned, and Disney, of course, they're going to put that out there. I don't think they expect, because their first push was not about the actors, and when Robert Downey Jr. said, "Please don't push me," well, why wouldn't they? They made all that money. There's more advertising for them. Endgame is going on Disney Plus. So when Endgame, think about this: when they push Robert Downey Jr. in an ad for Best Actor, think of it as an ad for Disney Plus, because Endgame is debuting. It's making its streaming debut, I guess, at 6:00 tomorrow morning on the East Coast. So it's all part of the same apparatus. It's all about marketing, and whether they win an Oscar or not, it's all the same thing. That's kind of the way I look at it. I mean, I don't see when people, does Robert Downey Jr. deserve? I mean, I think Endgame. What about Palm? What about her? What about a lot of the other actors in Endgame? Did Tony Stark do all the heavy lifting? His death scene was great. He had some good stuff at the beginning. But what about Nebula? I mean, Karen Gillan was great as Nebula. Did she, in Endgame, didn't she have harder work to do? Did Steve Rogers? Did Chris Evans? Chris Hemsworth was great as Thor. That scene that he had with his mother. But are those the best performances of the year? Hard to say. It's all business, though. It's all business. Let's see. Well, speaking of Endgame, here's another letter. I like this letter. This comes from Kenny Crayley Jr. Dear Rob and the Imagination Connoisseurs of the Post-Geek Singularity. Today I'm going to talk about the landscape of superhero television and how it has changed from 30 years ago to now. Specifically, live-action superhero television. I started watching superhero TV back in the 90s with Superboy and Lois and Clark, The New Adventures of Superman. But then came the WB and CW Smallville, and my love for superhero shows began to take off. It was an origin story of how Clark Kent became Superman, which was interesting. Sure, Smallville was not perfect by any means, but it had good seasons like 1, 2, 5, 9, and 10, but it had a lot of bad seasons too, like 3, 6, 7, and 8. But what I loved about Smallville was its characters like Tom Welling as Clark Kent, Michael Rosenbaum as Lex Luthor, and Erica Durance as Lois Lane, etc. Smallville paved the way for a lot of future superhero TV series to come later, like the CW DC TV Arrowverse, Arrow, The Flash, Legends of Tomorrow, Supergirl, Black Lightning, and Batwoman, as well as the Marvel Studios TV shows like Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. and the Marvel Netflix shows like Daredevil, Jessica Jones, Luke Cage, etc., and soon the Disney Plus Marvel shows. Superhero television has come a long way in 30-plus years. Back to the early days, we had only 1 to 2 superhero TV shows a year, and now we have up to 15 per year. Sure, not all the stories in the modern superhero shows are perfect, and the writing can be so-so at times, but when done really well, superhero television can be great and give you a sense of wonder, and can be just as great as superhero movies, and sometimes even better. What a great time we live in, indeed. Thanks, Rob, and keep up the great work. Longtime listener and watcher, Kenny K. Well, Kenny, we are living through certainly a renaissance, a golden age of superhero television, and not just Marvel and DC. I couldn't believe the Umbrella Academy. How amazing was that? I mean, Deadly Class, the Swamp Thing, Doom Patrol. I mean, the shows that we have are amazing. My first memories, there were two. The Adventures of Superman, the 50s with George Reeve as Superman. I loved that show when I was a kid. Loved it, loved it, loved it. I thought it was great. A lot of people don't remember it now, but it was fantastic. Then, of course, the Batman series. The Batman series with Adam West and Burt Ward. I love that too. And I basically, you saw those together. I mean, in syndication, they frequently ran them together. I saw them together growing up, and the toys, everything. And then for the modern, well, I say modern now, but as far as you had the 50s, the 60s, and I want to say it was the 70s when it began, but the Incredible Hulk television show with Bill Bixby and Lou Ferrigno, who played the Hulk. Those were the three superhero shows that I grew up on. And I loved all three of those shows for various reasons. They were very different kinds of shows, but I really, really loved them. And I think the problem was those shows, what I liked about them, even though Batman was totally camp, it still created a universe unto itself, which I really, really loved. It was of a piece. Like they went for this thing and they picked this way to do it and they went for it. And the Incredible Hulk was surprisingly poignant. Even the music, was great. And the stories, how he would travel the highways and byways of the land. Also, that reminds me, the Shazam show that was on Saturday mornings. They didn't call him Captain Marvel. It was called Shazam. I liked that show too. And Isis, and of course, Wonder Woman. But Wonder Woman, again, like Batman, had a certain goofy fun to it. Not as goofy as Batman, but we did get these shows when I was a kid. So it's not like we didn't have shows. And then there were spinoffs. There were the Incredible Hulk TV movies where we got to see Daredevil and we got to see Thor, yeesh. But that's when I began watching those shows. And sure, we got Superboy, of course, which was syndicated. The Adventures of Lois and Clark, really great take on it. Terry Hatcher, pre-Bond girl as Lois Lane. I thought she made a great Lois Lane. I thought Dean Cain was great as Superman. And so we're really lucky to live in the time that we live in now. And what's interesting is so many comic book related shows are being made. It's unbelievable. And I'm getting my beloved Moon Knight show finally. I don't know what kind of a show it's going to be, but I can't believe we're going to get a She-Hulk show, a Moon Knight show. I mean, come on. A Loki show, Falcon and Winter Soldier. It's just unbelievable what we are getting. We're getting another Superman show. Speaking of the CW, it's incredible what we've been getting. And I love that we live in this day and age. But I have to tell you, the CW shows keep a certain, they're very much like DC Comics. They're very sort of bubbly and treacly and fun. And they're like what it was like growing up when I was a kid reading comic books. I feel that the CW shows have captured that. They can be serious, but mostly they're fun. And I think that's great. They're a great counterpoint to what we're seeing in the theaters, especially after seeing Joker. But it's amazing. And don't forget the animation. I know you're talking live action shows here, but I mean, I remember the first time I saw Batman, the animated series, which led to the Adventures, the Superman animated series and the Justice League. Oh, we live in amazing times. But yeah, so for me, growing up, it was Batman, the Hulk, Saturday morning, Shazam, Isis, Almighty Isis, but she wasn't they did adapt her to comics, but she didn't come from the comics. It was good stuff. Good stuff. I like that. I like that stuff. So thanks for writing in about that. That was good. It's amazing what we're getting now. It's just I'm constantly blown away by the kind of shows that we are getting nowadays, because it is pretty amazing. The Richard sent in another super chat. My favorite show growing up was The Greatest American Hero. If I had the opportunity, I would make it myself. They've been talking about remaking that forever. The Greatest American Hero was another superhero show that was it was unique and it was original to TV. Believe it or not, I'm walking on air. I never thought it would be. It had its own theme song. It seems like all the great TV shows either had a piece of music or you had to have a good theme song, right? Wonder Woman. Dun, 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 dun. Yeah, I used to love all that stuff. The day, but Greatest American Hero was great. And the Greatest American Hero was sci-fi because it was like alien technology that he discovered. So good on them, which is good. Well, listen, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to bring an end to this Robservations number 273. I want to thank you all for being here. I want to thank everybody for supporting the channel, sending in letters. I got tons more letters I got to get to. I mean, Mike told me that like 30 more letters came in. So many letters. And again, I'll be back tomorrow. I'll be here all week, ladies and gentlemen. I'm not going to miss a day. And I'll tell you if we're going to do a Mandalorian spoiler review tomorrow night, which we probably will do. I'm very excited for the Mandalorian, ladies and gentlemen. We get it at 3. We get Disney Plus at 3 a.m. tomorrow morning, Tuesday at 3 a.m. I believe I'm going to have to get up like early, watch the Mandalorian because I'm going to talk about it on John Campia's show with him tomorrow. It's going to be exciting. So I want to thank you all for being here. Thanks for supporting the channel. Thanks for going to the website. And don't forget, anybody that goes to the website and comments on any letter or anything that we have on the website at theburnettwork.net, you could win your own bottle of Lucky Tiger all over body wash from head, I think they say from head to tail. It's really good stuff. I like it. It's light and lively. But we're going to be giving away one bottle of Lucky Tiger men's grooming products. Well, we're going to give away all over body wash for anybody. If you go to the website, theburnettwork.net, and you just comment on anything. Or you can, if you want to go watch my visual effects that I was doing for the Axonar feature film and listen to my commentary, there's about 50 minutes of video that I created for the never-to-be-made Axonar feature film, and you can see what I was trying to do. Of course, they're going to be using my visual effects and whatever they're going to do with Axonar now, so I'll be curious to see how my work is utilized in whatever Axonar films get made, but you can see what I was intending on the website. Also, there's going to be a new tomorrow. There's going to be a new Ali State column, The Feminerd Gaze. She wrote a pretty funny column about why we need Raylo. So let's hear it for Ali. That's going to be up on The Feminerd Gaze. So lots happening. I noticed that David Crabtree sent in a super chat. David Crabtree says, "Hey, Rob, in honor of Veterans Day, I want to give a special warrior shout out to all of my fellow brother and sister veterans of the U.S. Armed Forces." Well, David Crabtree, I want to thank you. David Crabtree has been a fan, a watcher. He did some great artwork for Collider Heroes and the John Campia show. He's just a great guy. And I want to say David is a Marine Corps veteran, USMC. So thank you, David. And I want to thank, once again, I said it at the top of the show, but thank you to all of our men and women in service to the United States and all branches of the military, including the Coast Guard. Don't forget about the Coast Guard and all of those people for doing such a wonderful job. And also, if you look up Jason Inman's, he gives comic books to the troops. Again, just look up Jason Inman. It's a great thing. He's been doing it for years. He himself is a veteran. So if you can help him out and his charity out to take comic books to troops all over the world, please, and tell him I sent you if you want. Anyway, I want to thank my moderators. I've got Jordy Lyons is new and Louis, you are new. I don't know. It's great to have him here. Of course, we got Detective Jim. We got Mike Bodden, the Honorable still for another 2 years. The Honorable Mike Bodden. He's been honorable most of his life, but now that he's the mayor, he's actually got it. You can add that to the title. The great Greg Smith, who is still building a 1-to-1 scale land speeder, and of course Terry, the sheriff of Nottingham. It's been a great time. And if you guys like these chats, please hit like, please subscribe, please hit the bell. Always, you need these analytics coming. Apparently, there's going to be a lot of changes in YouTube coming up in the next year, or maybe even in January. I don't know how it's going to affect this channel or the analytics or whatever, but I can only think that likes help. So I want to thank you for those as well and for all supporting the channel. And with that, I'm going to bring an end to Robservations number 273. Robservations, the show about something. Once again, I am your host, the Viceroy of Verisimilitude, the Master of Fun and Wonder, the existential Mr. Rogers, Mr. Robert Meyer Burnett. And you know what I always say? What I always say is not what Jack Burton always says. Jack Burton, no, I won't get into that. Well, I could say, yes, sir, the check is in the mail, but I won't. What I always say is, remember, every person you meet has a story to tell you have yet to hear. All you have to do is listen. And with that, I bring this chat to an end. Have a better day.